My name is Jos Harrison. I am a careers consultant at the university's careers service. And as part of my job, I work with students in the law school, so take a kind of particular interest in law school careers. I'm really delighted to be joined this afternoon by three Newcastle law graduates. We have got Ian Skelt QC. Ian is a barrister. We've got Mariko Yanagisawa, who is a solicitor. And we've got Otain, who is a project officer with the United Nations agency. They've all studied law here at Newcastle. Each of them is going to give a short presentation. Ian is going to go first. After Ian's presentation, there will be time for you to ask him some questions. After that, he's going to have to leave. We're really grateful for him for fitting us in today. After we've heard from Ian and Ian has left, then we will move on to our other two speakers. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Well, hi, everybody. I'm very pleased you could join this session. I'm honoured to have been invited. It's nice to keep in touch with the university. I've been asked to give a quick description of my career path, a few observations about the work that I do, and obviously to field any questions that you have. I've taken my tie off in a superficial attempt to look relaxed in front of students, but don't be taken in by that. I was at Newcastle between 1990 and 1993, so a long time ago. It even sounds a long time ago now, but I think it's still pretty similar. I don't think all that much has changed. I did an LLB, so a straight law degree, if you like. I went to university straight from school. I didn't do a gap year. Again, that was just part of just a straightforward approach. It was, I think, slightly rarer in those days to take time off. I also really, frankly, didn't have the money, so I needed to get on with it. I was, just a bit of background, I was the first one in my family to do any A-levels or do any further education of any sort. I didn't have any contacts in the law, so came to it really totally blind in many ways. One thing I will say, though, is that since being young, I'd always had part-time jobs and summer jobs, and that had given me a taste for working, and also, in all honesty, getting a bit of money in my back pocket that otherwise I wouldn't have had. And all that sort of thing is extremely valuable life experience. And one of the things I'd really like you to take from this is that you should try and do, even now, as much work experience as you possibly can in as many different fields as you possibly can. And I think, even though you're still very young, most of you, I'm sure, still of school age or thereabouts, I think you will already have a good taste for the things that you like, the things that you don't like. So spread your experience around. I did work experience or part-time jobs with surveyors, estate agents, accountants, solicitors, barristers, and in a hospital. And my original plan was to have been a doctor, but I spent 2 summers working in a local hospital, and the state of the junior doctors at that stage, they were like zombies. I just thought, no, that's not for me. So, but that was great work experience. You know, attracting you to something is as important as something demonstrating that you don't want to do it, because these are long-term plans. So the law seemed like a good idea to me. When I was at uni, student loans were just coming in. So it was moving from a better funded position to everybody funding themselves. Money was tight. Nothing's changed, I have to say. I think whilst the way funding's done, people when I was there, we were all pretty hard up, albeit I think probably the cost of living was a bit lower than it is these days. So, but the regime was quite relaxed. I can't speak to what it is now, but I think it's largely the same. You're left, certainly we were, to our own devices broadly. As long as you passed your exams and your assessments, nobody really bothered you. And that was a change from a much tighter regime of schools and A-levels and that type of environment to get to university. But it was important, certainly for me, to get to a stage where I was having to take responsibility for myself. and to organize myself and just start to get into the routine of thinking about what you're doing and where you're going, and not having to look for other people for support all the time. Most people on my course went to the solicitor side of the profession, just for sort of personal quirky reasons. I fancied the bar rather than that course. But again, do work experience, see what you are more attracted to yourself. There are very strong pros and cons to each if you do want to have a career in the law. And also, as you'll hear from other speakers, career in the law doesn't have to be that narrowly defined these days. You can do a lot of different things. If you go to the bar, it's still the position, as I had to, that you do a year of professional exams. Then you could only do them in London, but you can do them elsewhere now. After which you start in practice doing something called your pupillage. So you do 6 months on the job training when you're watching others, but you're not doing the job yourself. And then the second 6 months of the year, you are actually doing it yourself, albeit under quite tight guidance. Now, certainly by that point, by the time I was spending a year in London, money was very tight. But when I did start my pupillage, the difference there was suddenly you started getting a bit of money in. So they were quite poorly paid in those days. Now, a lot of sets pay you enough to get by for a year, which is important. And some of the better sets will pay you enough that you can draw down money whilst you're at bar school, which helps. Competition was high then, it's high now, and it's the same for most attractive jobs within the field of law. You have to get your head around the idea that if you want to go to the sorts of place you want to be working, chances are it's going to be very competitive. So one of the strong bits of advice I'd try and give at this stage is that you should already be thinking about CV building. Get on with it now. You need to you need to set a long audit trail of the type of person that you are. And by that, I don't just mean doing well at university. Certainly the chambers I'm a member of, we very much look for something other than having a good academic record. Don't feel in any way ashamed, and I mean this, don't feel any way ashamed. If you've faced uphill struggles at any point in your life, if you've had challenges or difficulties, those are things that you should take the benefit from, because that tends to tell people, if you deploy it in the right way, that tends to tell people that you are somebody who is hardworking and resourceful. And a lot of employers are looking for exactly that. We see, and I'm one of the people involved in the application process, we see an awful lot of applicants who've gone to very good schools, who go to good universities and get great results. But you need to try and distinguish yourselves in some way from that. And I'm sure Josh will back me up on this, but you know, we look for people who have got something else about them. So we would look for people, and it was always the same, but it's particularly acute now, who have got a track record of having applied themselves. So if you have worked in a shop, something that's apparently straightforward as this, if you have worked in a shop or worked in shops or other jobs in addition to your studies, that is a strong positive, because that shows somebody who's hardworking and resourceful. If you have outside interests, such as sport, that's an obvious example. Again, that's a huge positive. So any type of outside activity showing application, hard work, teamwork, interacting with the public, these are all great positives. And you should be getting on with that now. And that way you will have an established record over a period of years demonstrating that that is the type of person that you are. I marked an application for somebody recently who had an okay academic record and wouldn't normally have got through our SIFT as a potential applicant. But what this person had put in their form was that they had been a semi-professional cyclist for about 5 years. So that just gives a hint as somebody who has applied themselves in a pretty extreme way, in addition to managing to get a half-decent degree. So that ticks lots of boxes for us. So you don't have to do it to quite that extent, but anything like that, and I'm spending a bit of time emphasizing that because it is very, very important, whatever you want to do. Just career-wise, I started working in the north of England. I grew up in East Anglia, but having gone to Newcastle, that had given me an affinity for the north. And so I started working in the north of England. I had a mixed workload to start with. My first few years, about 8 or 9 years, I was doing almost exclusively criminal work. I moved out of criminal work. I enjoyed it, but the pay was getting quite poor, in all honesty. So I could see the direction of travel with that. So I moved out of that into personal injury work, focused on that for a few years, and then ended up moving across really into more work that focuses on the police, human rights cases, and work with public authorities, what's often called public law work. So that's what I do most of. I've been a QC for a few years, and all that means really is that restricts the work I do to the more heavy cases, the bigger stuff, and I would tend to work as a team with one or more other barristers who I would lead as part of the preparation and presentation of a case. So that's a fairly traditional career path. But in terms of, if you like, a typical day, I was asked to give you an example of a typical day. Well, I have to say one of the strong upsides of what I do is that there is no such thing. So one of the things that keeps me very much interested in what I'm doing is it's not formulaic at all. But by way of an example, so yesterday, I started the day with an emergency injunction in the High Court to stop the principal of a school being dismissed. She claimed that she was being dismissed on discriminatory grounds. The school was denying that, but we needed an injunction to stop the school dismissing her until after her claim for discrimination could be heard. So that was the start of the day. So we managed to achieve that. I then had a meeting with a man whose brother had been shot by terrorists in Northern Ireland in the 1990s. And he was claiming that the terrorists, or is claiming that the terrorists were agents of the state. So he's suing the army and the police. And I have a very particular role in his case. I'm something called a special advocate, which means I meet him, I take instructions from him, and I work for him. But since the meeting that I had with him yesterday, I'm not allowed in law to speak to him again because I now have to go and look at a lot of sensitive documents. So part of the deal with me representing him and reading those documents is I'm not allowed to talk to him about them, but I represent him in legal proceedings that are now going to happen in private. So that was the second part of the day. And then I ended the day having a consultation with a professor, a consultant surgeon, who is going through quite a contentious disciplinary process at the moment. So that was an example of my day yesterday. It was all very interesting, but of course the downside is that I couldn't do that blind, so I had to spend most of Sunday preparing to do that. And so what you do all needs to be prepared, and there's an amount of work that has to go into that. And so yesterday evening ended up with me preparing for today. So what am I doing today? I'm advising a doctor who has retired, but he's being refused his pension, which you'll probably think sounds outrageous. However, he's alleged to have committed a serious criminal offence during the course of his work. So you might think that's a reason to deny him his pension, but he's never been charged. So again, you might think, right, well, if you've been just accused of something, but you've not been charged or proved with anything, does that mean you should be entitled to your pension? So that's what I'm dealing with this morning. And then when I leave you, I've got a case to conclude, and then I'm meeting with an expert later this afternoon about an inquest which is happening in September. So that's a couple of days in my life. It's very hard work, notwithstanding me not becoming a doctor because it seemed like too much work. I've ended up having to do a lot of very hard work, but it's interesting. Profession's very varied. You meet lots of interesting people. I like that the bar is still the home to quite a lot of eccentrics. So that's something that attracts me. In case you're wondering, the amount that we earn at the bar varies very, very widely. You'll be aware that strikes are ongoing at the moment for people at the criminal bar. Criminal work is very, very poorly paid for the amount of time, effort, and emotion that you have to put in, the responsibility that you have to carry, whereas other aspects of this career can be very, very well paid. So what I would say is that you have to go into a career like this with your eyes open. So, that's why experience is so important. You don't want to just focus on things like money. You need to be taking a much more overall assessment of the work that you want to be doing, what type of career you want to have. But similarly, if you've worked very hard to achieve something and you're doing a very important job that has a lot of responsibility and is difficult, you don't perhaps want to be in a position where you're on the constant verge of bankruptcy doing that. But these are all issues that you'll need to grapple with. And part of the deal with being at university is you need to make these decisions for yourselves now. So that's a very, very brief overview. I'm sorry if I've done that very quickly. Jos, do you want to kind of manage chat questions? I saw a few coming in. It might be more efficient for you to do it.
Yes, we have got a lot of questions, like masses. So thank you so much. I've been trying to put them into kind of some sort of categories, but I think they are quite diverse. So what I might do is just start at the top and work through. Okay, so a question from Beza. What were your expectations when you chose to study law?
Well, I didn't really know is the answer to that. I think people today are much more organized than I was. I went into it a bit blind, in all honesty. I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. When I was at university, the bar tended to suggest itself to me. I had done some work experience, but I didn't go in with any totally focused view about what I wanted to do. I also hadn't really done enough research on the type of stuff I'd be studying. So again, that was a voyage of discovery. Jos will be horrified with me giving you this type of advice, but so I didn't really know. What I did think was it might be a useful springboard to an interesting career, which has turned out to be right. And one of the really good things about a law degree is it is pretty varied. You're not pigeonholing yourself, actually. So that's the honest answer. Right. Wasn't very specific. I probably hadn't done enough preparation, but that's the story of my life.
And it's an interesting question here from Robin. She's asking, he or she, sorry, is asking, how did you find the change from studying law to practicing law? And was it hard getting employed, well, she says, straight after university?
The change is total. Despite what the learned academics at Newcastle or anywhere else will tell you, the study of it has nothing to do with the practice of it. And all you're doing at uni and in your professional exams is actually picking up, albeit very important, basics, but the basic legal framework. And you then go and do on-the-job training. It's 100% different. But the core subjects are actually quite useful. I still use now stuff that I learned when I was doing my degree, things like contract law and stuff like that. As the basis of the way that you interact with things. So it's 100% different. Now, as regards pupilages, which is a kind of employment, well, I was quite fortunate. I got one in the first year of applying. Some people don't. It can be an uphill struggle. But what you need to do is be realistic. Okay, so unless you are getting, and I don't wish to sort of dampen everybody's excitement, but you need to be getting at least a 2-1 to be within the realms of getting a pupillage. If you've got a 2-2, unless you have some spectacular reason why you've got a 2-2, you're just not going to get a pupillage. Okay, that's just the reality of it. So you should look into what the degree requirements are. That's something I'd say strongly, but work on that basis. Okay.
Brilliant. A question from Katie. Do you think having contacts makes entering the industry an easier process?
Kind of depends what work you're doing. It's not all that useful, actually. I was worried that without contacts you wouldn't get there. These days you don't need contacts to get in. It's much more merit based. And there are procedures in place that are intentionally designed to prevent people getting in through the back door. So just to use an example, we have a team of people in my set who mark applications. and the first team mark applications to make sure, for example, any reference to anybody's gender or ethnicity, things like that, are totally removed, so that the second team, who then mark them, the application forms, cannot discern, either directly or through a matter of inference, anything that could either consciously or subconsciously lead to any positive or negative discrimination against people. And they're just practical things you have to put in place. And it's now so tightly policed, which is right, I hasten to add, that the sort of old boy network it's certainly not what it used to be. It's, I wouldn't say that it doesn't happen, but I wouldn't be concerned about it.
Okay, that's great to hear. Thank you. Question from Charlotte. Charlotte's asking, what is the most interesting case that you've worked upon?
Good question. There are lots and lots of interesting ones for different reasons. Some are academically interesting. Some are interesting from a human level. Some are very rewarding from a human level, others less so. So I've recently had a case where I had I'll be careful what I say about this, so I don't give the person's details away. I was representing somebody who's a senior teacher who was in a Catholic school, and she was being hounded out because she had announced that she'd got married to another woman, okay? And there was a concerted effort with certain members of staff to hound her out. She'd been a lifelong, highly successful teacher. And through a process of high court applications and various other legal steps, we have kept her in her job. And what's really happened is basically the people who were causing the problem have now been sidetracked. So that's just, in the last couple of years, that's been the most rewarding for me.
Thank you. And just on that theme of cases, there's a question from Naya, and she's saying, did you enjoy working on SD versus the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire? She said she's from Yorkshire, so she's particularly intrigued.
Yeah, well, I've always done quite a lot of work in Yorkshire. I lived in Yorkshire for 22 years, I think. So yeah, that was an interesting one, because that was one of the early disclosure cases about how much of your background you need to tell people about. The law's moved on a bit since then, but yeah, that was an interesting case. And there was another case I was involved in for the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, which went to the Supreme Court, and that was a development of that. It's essentially about, for everybody else, things you've done as a child, whether they can stay with you to an adult. So if you steal something when you're a 15-year-old, is that something you then have to disclose if you're applying for a job when you're 25? So, but yeah, it was interesting. Thank you, and good research. There you go.
Right, now we've got a question from Zara, and I'm asked this question an awful lot, so I'll be really interested to hear what you say. How did you pick your Inn of Court?
The soup is the straightforward answer to that. When I, just to kind of explain that, when I went to bar school, I was broke. So the inns still have a process whereby it's kind of done on the QT slightly, but you can eat there at lunchtime, and they would normally have, it's really for poor students, certainly in my day, they would have something on the menu that was really cheap. So then it was soup. But so this is a bit of a Victorian tale, isn't it, this? But anyway, eating gruel. But no, Lincoln's Inn had good soup for not very much money. So that's how I ended up at Lincoln's Inn. They're all very similar. They're all very, very similar. They do a very similar job. You know, they're very varied places amongst the members. So there was an old rule decades ago that particular inns did different sorts of work, but that's totally gone now. So, you know, just go where your mates are. That's one of the best options.
And look at the menus carefully.
Yeah, so there you go. It's the soup.
Grand. Okay. We've got a few more. Are you okay to carry on a little bit? Grand. So we've got a question from Janat. The question is, what is a firm's commitment to pro bono and diversity like? So maybe we're thinking of the chambers, perhaps. Yeah.
The commitment to pro bono work is entirely individual if you're a barrister. So you don't have to do it if you don't want to. You can do it if you want to. Diversity is different. Diversity is compulsory. It's very tightly policed by the Bar Standards Board. So there's been a revolution, really. Certainly over the course of my career, there's been a total revolution in the way the bars run. The issue, diversity is a very broad issue, which is very difficult to summarize in something as quick as this. But you have lots of different issues around that, and no doubt you can do your own reading about it. So one of the central problems at the moment that a lot of work's being put into is the difficulty with retention of female members of the bar when they go, well, I mean, the official line is after a certain age, but what that really means is when people have children. So when female members of chambers get to the point in their careers when they're starting to have children or want to have children, they go away for a while, and then it's quite difficult getting people back in or maintaining the practice while they're away. And it's, there are policies that are now in place that were never there beforehand. And there are lots of other initiatives. And again, this is a very, very broad topic. So there are lots of individual issues. For example, there's a lack of, if you look at the numbers, there's a significant lack of minority ethnic tenants in top commercial sets. I saw today, I think there's a new initiative to try and deal with that or address that. So there's a lot going on around that. It's far from perfect, but it's a lot better than it used to be. I mean, some of it this isn't a cop-out, but some of it reflects the problems with society more generally, access to education, that type of thing. But certainly a lot of it is particular to the bar. But there's quite a lot of stuff published about this. And going back to what I said earlier about application processes, I certainly hope it's a lot better than it used to be. And also there is in a lot of places an active push to try and deal with this. People at the bar, in my experience, people at the bar tend to be right thinking. They would do things because it's the right thing to do. So there's quite a lot of proactive stuff being done around it.
There are a few questions about type of practice. So yeah. Victoria is asking, how and why did you pick the area of law that you wanted to practice in?
Well, I started off in a general set. What happens? What happened when I joined it? Going back in the annals of time, most sets were general. So most chambers did general work, a wide array, and then you would start in a particular set, and then you would end off sort of meandering off into the type of work that you were best at or liked. There's more specialisation these days, particularly in sets in London. Outside London, sets tend to be more general, but it's a bit of a tricky issue, this, because unless you have done a lot of work experience and you know exactly what kind of work you want to do, and this isn't me being patronising, but most of you won't have had enough experience to know that with any certainty. There's a risk in being too specific in the set that you're joining. And also, certainly the set that I'm a member of at the moment, we welcome applications from people who've gone off and done other things, found that they have a particular ability or bent for a particular type of work, specialise in that, and then join. So don't feel you have to specialise at the start. Nothing wrong with joining a specialist set. You can build a practice in a particular field and then move to a specialist set. So again, as I said earlier, I'd rather kind of meandered into it, but it worked for me in the end. So. Okay.
Flynn, would you like to unmute Flynn and ask your question?
So you mentioned before the barrister strikes, and in law, money is a big thing. And I feel like some people don't want to encourage that, but it is. I went into law thinking, okay, big money. And I guess the idea is solicitor is sort of a constant reward for constant work, and barristers high risk, high reward. But in some cases now we see it's high risk and almost nothing. Do you think by the time that we're sort of in there through the ranks of university and into sort of this barrister and pupillage stage, that sort of guarantee of high risk, high reward of being a barrister will be put through by either the government or these strikes working?
Well, the short answer to that is it varies so much. I wouldn't define the two professions in that way, because the amount, forgive me being upfront about it, but the amount that you get paid as a lawyer tends to directly relate to the sort of work you're doing. And that's the same, frankly, if you're a solicitor or you're a barrister. And if you're doing criminal work as a solicitor, chances are you have all the same financial pressures you will if you're doing criminal work as a barrister. So that, it's more the type of work that you do. The bar's doing very well. The bar's very busy. But places tend to be thriving. Solicitors are also doing very well at the moment. Everywhere's very busy. And look, if you want to have a slightly more predictable, steady income stream, there is absolutely nothing wrong. Even if you're attracted to the bar, go and be a solicitor for a few years. Please don't think that's in any way patronizing to solicitor. I don't mean in that way at all. I mean, because I think there was slightly more predictability when I was joining about career outcomes. I was more inclined to take a punt, but friends of mine, alumni from Newcastle, when I've speaking to a friend today who's an equity partner of an American firm, and he'll be doing very, very well for himself. If you're interested in that. So just don't define it in terms of risk and reward like that. If I were you, I'd think about it more in terms of the type of work that you're doing. There's a difference between the two careers in the type of work you'll be doing on a daily basis. But as regards what you'll get out of it in financial terms, it's much more closely defined by the field you're in. So if you're doing commercial work, happy days financially. But of course, your daily existence will be very different to that if you're doing criminal work as a solicitor or a barrister. Okay.
Great, thank you very much. And I think in saying that, you also address a couple of the questions also that were in the chat. So that's brilliant. Okay, Ian, thank you so much for sharing your experience and answering all the questions that we had time for. Lots of thank yous in the chat. So
well,
thank you again.
Thank you all for tuning in. Hope some of that was helpful. I'll say this, enjoy your time at university. I loved it. I didn't know what to expect. It was a bit daunting, totally different to anything I'd experienced before. None of my family had gone to uni, so none of them could help me. I was packed off on the train with a trunk, but look, it's great. It's a big learning experience. I'm still in touch with a great number of people who I met there. Some of my closest friends I met at uni. So, it's a big positive. Enjoy it. Don't worry about the pressures you're under. You'll spend the rest of your life at work, so make the most of the time at university. Okay.
Oh,
so
brilliant.
Hear from you all. Best of luck.
Right. Okay. So we're now going to move on and hear from Mariko, who is going to share her experiences with us for the next 10 minutes. After Mariko, we're going to move on to our third and final speaker, Ala. And then when we've heard from the two of them, we will take questions this time. And I will now hand over to Mariko. Thanks, Mariko.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. As Ian said as well, it's always good to get involved with Newcastle University events, even after we've graduated. So it's really great to be here this afternoon. At the moment, I am a newly qualified solicitor in an employment team in a commercial firm in Leeds. I work at the Squire, Patton, Boggs, but firstly, I'll talk about my university experience. So I was at Newcastle Uni studying law between 2015 and 2018. So I'm not too long graduated. I was interested in law before I was applying for university. I'd done law at A level, found it interesting. I liked the idea of sort of making arguments and the critical thinking, and found that I was interested in sort of legal stories on the news and things like that. And I thought, even if I didn't have a sort of set career path in mind when I was applying to university, but I thought even if I changed my mind, it's still a good general degree to have and would be pretty employable even if I didn't go into law. So that was kind of my thinking behind it. Started at Newcastle University and really enjoyed my degree. The first 2 years, at least I did, you sort of do like core modules, with the final year being modules that you pick. Had a great time socially as well. Newcastle's a great city to be a student in. And again, would echo what Ian said, some of my best friends are people from university, and I'm coming back up in another week or two to come and see them again. So I think it's also, sort of a great opportunity that way. When I was at university, I studied a range of topics. So that included all the sort of core modules like Ian had mentioned, things like contract tort, but I also opted to study competition, evidence, law, gender, sexuality, career development, medical law and criminology. So that was kind of my degree, but in amongst that I did a range of extracurricular activities, and again feel like I'm just echoing what Ian said, but I would really echo the idea of get organised quickly, and it doesn't necessarily mean having a set plan really early. I think it's just that a lot of the skills and sort of questions you'll get asked interviewing for sort of any graduate type job are pretty similar, in things like they might ask for teamwork or time management, etc., things like that. And just having sort of general extracurriculars, part-time work, etc., that can speak to those sorts of skills is really, really important. So I was a student representative of the junior lawyer division when I was in Newcastle, which was a great way to make contacts with people in the profession, get tips on how to apply for training contracts. I used to organise events. So it was a great sort of networking opportunity. I also did the client interviewing competition at Newcastle Uni and was an officer on the Law Society for that. I did sort of student mentoring and voluntary work with charities on a particular charity on a weekly basis. I was a research assistant for majority of my degree. I also sort of did work at the Citizens Advice Bureau, and then a range of work experience placements, shadowing barristers and solicitors. And I think when I was at your stage, I found the idea of getting work experience incredibly daunting because no one in my family has practiced law or done a law degree, and we don't really have any sort of contacts in that sphere. So I thought that was something that would set me back, given how competitive applying for these jobs are. But fortunately, what I would say is when you get to university, I found there was a lot more opportunities, whether it's open days that firms do or work experience like vacation schemes or formal schemes or things that come up a bit more ad hoc. I found that there were more opportunities just being in that sort of area. So I think if you're at the moment struggling to get that work experience or wondering how you'll sort it out, I would just say be open to the opportunities at university, because I think there is more on. And also sort of linking to my time with the junior lawyers division, I got some work experience off the back of, I just was sat next to someone at a dinner and talked to them about their job, and they just said, do you want to sort of shadow me and a barrister that they work with, and kind of set up that way. So I'd say don't sort of undermine any potential opportunity. Like there's always sort of an opportunity there. And I think particularly with barristers, I mean, Ian's not here to correct me, so I may be wrong, but I would imagine, say, more at my sort of firm, it's more of a formal scheme, whereas I know they definitely have many pupilages and very formal schemes with barristers' chambers. But equally, because they are self-employed and you can sit in the public gallery anyway of most trials, I found it a little bit easier in some respects, kind of shadowing in that sort of area. And also off the back of that would suggest just going to watch cases as well, because like I say, it's free, and generally you're allowed to, unless there's a particular reason why the case has to be closed, you're allowed to go watch it. So there's sorts of, I feel like there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of get an idea of the different types of careers available. In my second year, I applied for training contracts because I think it definitely is still the case that was the point where it was the earliest time you could sort of apply if you wanted to start your job straight after your sort of legal studies. Unfortunately, I got a job in that sort of first round of applying, but it definitely took a bit of effort in that, like, I remember sitting down in the summer of my first year and sort of mapping out and working out where the gaps in my CV might be and kind of tailoring extracurriculars around that. So it definitely required a bit of forward planning. And I also used the career service and worked with Jos as well, which was incredibly helpful, because I feel like the process of applying for any sort of graduate job is really, really daunting. And you can work with people at Newcastle Uni like Jos, who have had years of experience of seeing people go through that, knowing what the sort of interview structure is like. And it kind of takes away a bit of that fear. And also, I think we discussed an interview where I think I did my first interview and it didn't go great, and sort of discussed learning points from that, and then did an interview for where I work now, and it went really well. I really valued that experience. So got my training contract in my second year, and then finished off my degree, moved from Newcastle to Leeds to do the LPC at BPP here, starting in 2018, finished that in 2019, and started that summer my training contract at Squires. I have done seats in a variety of areas. We generally do 6 4-month seats, but my training contract was slightly different. But I have done seats in employment, which is where I'm qualified, financial regulations, tax, a client secondment to one of our big retail clients, corporate, commercial litigation, and pensions. So a big variety of work, and a lot of departments which are complementary to where I've qualified. My work at the moment is a mixture of sort of 3 main areas, really. The first being contentious employment work, so sort of tribunal claims, and generally I act for respondent employers, so where they've had a claim being brought by an employee, and normally defending that position. My second main stream of work is corporate work, so we do quite a lot of corporate work as a firm, so this is supported on the employment aspects of that, so whether that's due diligence or drafting, negotiating like service agreements, consultancy agreements, etc. So essentially when a company might be buying another company, sort of feeding into the employment aspects of that, because often the sort of key people that might own a business are a pretty big reason as to why someone would buy it, sort of that experience. So it's a great way to add value to those deals. And then the third main strand is advisory work. So that kind of is a all-encompassing title of everything else, which could be a client calling and saying that someone has raised a grievance about something at work, what do we do? Or help them drafting communications to clients, or they want to change someone's terms and conditions. A large part of that advisory work was around when the furlough scheme came out. I wasn't in the team at the time because I was still completing my training contract, but that's an example of where clients can heavily rely on your advice. And yeah, it's a great range of sort of queries that you get in to be able to learn from. At work at the moment, outside of sort of my day job, I'm the gender diversity champion for Leeds. So I know that we talked about sort of diversity and inclusion, and that's definitely a big part of working in a law firm too. I am also part of the multicultural resource group, and we've got an initiative in Leeds called Stronger Together, where we're working with the remaining big 6 law firms and then the big 4 accountancy firms to try and tackle diversity issues. And then I'm also on the charity committee, and we've done things like organising a 3 Peaks trip and sort of various other activities to try and raise money. So that is a really quick overview of my career to date, pretty short to date, given that I didn't graduate that long ago. But yeah, happy to take any questions after the other presentation.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I can see we've already got lots of questions waiting in the chat. So we will come to those when we've heard from Ella. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. So my name is Ella Otain, and I'm currently working as a junior professional officer at UNESCO, so the UN specialized agency that works with education, culture, science, and CI. Now, I think there was a lot of overlap of some of the things that I would say that were already mentioned before. So things like, for example, I've never had a huge plan to enter into the law world. It was just something that happened. I thought I wanted to be a doctor when I was younger, so it was always between doctors and lawyers, but that was just because all the series I watched, it always made it seem like something like I wanted to do. And I always knew that there was that side of helping other people that for me just made me want to get into that. So after high school, I didn't get into the medical school I wanted, so I closed that idea and I was like, okay, let's move on to the next thing. So I went to Newcastle in 2014 and I did my law degree. And while I was doing my law degree, I was really busy with a lot of societies and projects and what have you. And I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I'm not one of those like, oh, I need to study all the time people. No, for me, it was more like, okay, I need to do good, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So that's why I was always very active outside of my course. And then in my final year, so in my third year, I started, like, co-founded kind of a project called Nest, which if you join Newcastle, you'll be hearing a lot about, and it supports kind of refugees and asylum seekers. So after I concluded, my degree, I had to find a way to stay in the UK because I'm international. So it's like, oh, how about I do a master's degree? And I went into doing a master's in international law just after. Now, for me, I've always thought that lawyer work, if it's not like, criminal or supporting and helping people, it's a bit boring. So I sat with myself and I'm like, oh, what do I do with my life? And I was very lucky. I found this opportunity to do a traineeship at the UN. And it was never something that I thought about, but I was just like, let's just go for it. And now I've been doing this for 3.5 years. And it's been an amazing opportunity. So I work in culture and implementing kind of the cultural conventions that state parties sign and just working on their implementation in the country. So I was based in Paris for 2 years. And now I'm based in Jordan, so I work quite closely with the government here to ensure that, that they're meeting all of their obligations under the conventions that they're signed to. And I think what's really interesting about a law degree is it just opens so much for you. So law is just one of those degrees that you can almost work anywhere. And a lot of people that have interviewed me have told me like, oh, you really stood out because everything else that you were doing at law school. I've been approached by some of the big four consulting firms and all of that. And I didn't have the highest grades. And it was always, they always said, we're really tired of just seeing these people that, all they know is like the study or the highest grades. So there is a shift for what employers are looking for. And it's like when I'm part of like an interviewing panel or what have you, I hear that all the time. It's great to get good grades, but it's not enough anymore. And it's just, how do you find the balance between the two? And at one point, so now, whenever I'm approached by someone, no one asks me about my transcripts anymore, like at all. Everyone's asking me about what have you been doing? What have you been up to? So I think this is really, I know that Ian touched upon it quite a lot, but just being active and just doing a little bit more than your law degree is really, really important. And I think one thing that I always tell people, it's okay not to have it figured out. Like I've graduated 3.5 years ago. I've been working. I don't know what I want to do next. I might want to go back into law practice later on in my life, but as it is right now, I'm just always making sure that I'm up to date. I'm enrolled like in 1,000 courses, legal courses, non-legal courses. I want to have the information and be able to have the options in case, I wanted to get into it, but it's not, but I've always been very flexible. And I think it does make me stressed and anxious sometimes because I sit with myself and I go like, oh, I've met so many people that have it all planned out and I don't. But it has, in a sense, it really did give me amazing opportunities So working in international organizations or in the UN or what have you is amazing. And I'm more than happy, if anyone has questions later on, to answer, what that kind of entails. But yeah, I think really the two takeaways from me is that it's okay not to know where you're going, because I don't know, and it's always worked out, and then also just make sure that it's not just your degree, because people are looking for more. It's all the skills that you're developing, your interpersonal skills and all of that you can only demonstrate when you share the experiences of these work experiences, even if it's an internship or just volunteering or what have you, and they really make all the difference. Yeah, I think I'll conclude with that.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And just to say hello, I'm really excited to meet you, because NEST is now such a huge project at the university. So many students are involved in it. It's won so many awards, and just, gosh, what a legacy to leave. That is fantastic. So thank you for that as well. Okay, so we've got questions in the chat. And let's just start, actually, because Ala's just been speaking and you've been speaking about working internationally. So Alexander's asking, what are some of the challenges of working internationally?
That's a hard question. I think for me, it would be more emotional hardships, like being always abroad, being away from family and what have you. But I think in the work environment, and depending on where you're working, there isn't, much difference of where you'd be from. So like, working for the UN, it's very diverse and what have you. Although, it's not that easy working in the UN, because there's these really high ideals. I think for me, I don't know, for me, it's been all about opportunities. Although now, after, traveling around a bit, I think I do need to kind of settle down, and it does make settling down a bit difficult. So I think, I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. And another question for you, Ala. This is from Aimee, who says, as a Muslim woman myself, do you think there is any barriers to becoming successful in the legal sector? Your views on that? I know you're not necessarily in the legal sector at the moment, but
I think it depends. I think it really depends on where you are and where you're going to work. I'm not, and this is to be very frank, I'm not very familiar with the legal sector in the UK. So I don't know if that's where you plan to work later on. And it's, so for me, I know that everyone tries to celebrate diversity, and they try to implement all of these policies to ensure, that no one's discriminated against. But for me, of course, like wearing a headscarf anywhere in Europe can be a little bit difficult, either at work or outside of work. And people always come to you and go like, oh, you're Muslim, but you've changed my opinion about Muslims. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like, yeah, but like specifically to the legal sector, and maybe your question's more related into the UK, I don't know. Like, I don't know if Mariko, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name properly, I don't know if from like a diversity kind of, like accepting different religious backgrounds or what have you, you could maybe advise on that.
Yeah, I think that we've definitely got sort of a wide range of people at Squires, and I think there's definitely a move in the legal profession to make it more inclusive with different cultures. And I think part of that is the sort of understanding piece of like, whether it be sort of for cultural or religious reasons or caring responsibilities or whatever it is that makes maybe your day-to-day life slightly different. Because I suppose that's probably the biggest thing that might impact on the ability to do a job, which is quite demanding time-wise. As long as there's sort of understanding and open conversations there, which I think definitely, I know in my firm, there's a willingness to have, then it has to be an open profession. And I think people, in terms of what people view as right, it wouldn't sort of, it would go against all those sorts of values if it wasn't open. So on a personal level, I've not from a sort of multicultural point of view experienced difficulties at work in that respect, but I think there's definitely an awareness of the importance of that.
Thanks. And sticking with you, Mariko, a question from Melissa. And she's asking, what was important for you when choosing a firm to work for?
It was a bunch of different things, really. So a big one was location. And I think that was probably my starting point. I remember that I had a whole spreadsheet of like a long list of places and like with pros and cons and things like that and details about them, which looking back, I feel like I was way more organised or keen than I necessarily needed to be. But yes, I'd looked at location and knew that I'm from like an hour away from Leeds, so like almost an hour between Leeds and then Newcastle sort of either way. So I was looking to either stay in Newcastle or move to Leeds because I wanted to be near home. So that impacted things. I didn't really have a desire to move to London or go anywhere sort of further afield. So then looking in Newcastle and Leeds, I knew that I wanted to do work at a commercial firm. So that rules out some of them. And I didn't know what area of law I wanted to qualify into, but I wanted to go to what's called sort of a full service commercial firm where you'll get access to a whole range of commercial type work. So including what I do, employment, but things like corporate, real estate, tax, litigation, etc. So again, there was a select amount of firms that fit that bill. And then within that, I also considered people that I'd met from the firms at like Newcastle University's law fair and different sort of events the university put on, and reputational wise, like how they, what I'd sort of heard about them. I'd also considered who was going to pay for the LPC and what sort of finances would be available there. Because I think like the conversations about money earlier, it's not the be all and end all, but it's like equally big chunk of money. I know they're looking at doing the course differently now, but it is a big chunk of money. So it was one that I thought about at the time as well. And again, that sort of ruled out some firms. And then after that, I think I applied to 6 firms in total for a training contract or vacation scheme. I did 2 vacation schemes, and I love where I work now, but I think after I'd kind of narrowed down where I wanted to apply to, it was kind of a case of where you get a training contract, and totally don't regret my decision. Look, like I say, love living in Leeds, and I think my firm's great, but yeah, I think there's also that sort of practical side of it too. So it was a combination of all those factors, really.
Brilliant, thank you. And just kind of sticking with choices that you've made, Mariko, what made you choose to be a solicitor over being a barrister? This is a question from Lily.
A mixture really of some practical reasons, like barristers are generally self-employed. I think that can be really attractive to some people, which is why a reason why they might be looking to go down that route. For me, it personally wasn't. Also, I think I do public speaking, whether it's like this or I did sort of mooting at university and different things like that. And sometimes I enjoy it. I generally, either enjoy it or don't mind doing it. But I don't think that whenever I do advocacy, which is quite a small part of my job, but I do the odd bit of advocacy at the tribunal, it's not my top thing to do. I'd much rather talk like in this sort of setting than in sort of a legal setting like that in front of a judge. So yeah, I think that also pretty much rules out being a barrister. And yeah, just thought that I think obviously, I suppose it varies so much and I can't really speak to what being a barrister is like, but I know as a solicitor, you kind of sit with the cases generally for longer. You generally have more contact with the client in preparing for the case. And in some scenarios, the barrister will get the papers quite late on and will just be going in and sort of doing the hearing. Whereas I kind of liked being involved at an earlier stage, getting to grips with the issues and things like that. And there's a lot of things, so I suppose on each side, that the other sort of professional doesn't get to see. That, for example, like if we settle things or have sort of commercial discussions earlier on, the barrister generally won't be involved. But then equally, I don't attend majority of the hearings for my cases, so I suppose it's a large personal preference point, and also in a practical level, not that the training contract numbers are much better, but I knew that applying to be a barrister the numbers would be sort of stacked against you. And yeah, I just wasn't motivated enough to go down that route to deal with that.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you. And just kind of drawing on from that a little bit, there's a question from Ted, and he's asking really, how difficult is it to successfully get a training contract? Obviously you did it, but any kind of anecdotes from your peers?
I'd say like whenever I was in sort of probably a few years or a couple of years older than you guys are, I definitely looked at like the statistics, looked at the numbers of, and I think that at least at the time you could see how many people were roughly applying for the training contracts, and then roughly like you would know how many places were available, and I think it was like quite a depressing statistic. I know anecdotally some friends have done multiple years of applications, and they're friends that are, you know, got really good degrees, did a lot of extracurriculars, really personable, etc. And I think part of it, I think, is a bit of a game of luck and timing. But in saying that, when I did start looking at the numbers, I remember it wasn't a helpful attitude for me to go into sort of interviews with, because you can kind of already count yourself out before you've even gone there. And I think so in short, I'd say it's difficult. I'd say get prepared early. Any graduate job, I think, is probably a lot more graduates than roles available, but equally Newcastle University is a great university that you get a really good degree. There's plenty of things to get involved with outside of your degree to kind of give you that rounded application, that you stand as much of a chance as anyone else. And I think when I've started working and when I got my training contract, you yourself, you don't think you're any. I always thought like, oh, those people, the interview seemed so much better, or they had so much more. And I think like ultimately you don't know exactly what they're looking for, and generally they just want normal people that have a good academic background and have done some stuff in their spare time.
Yeah, okay, that's great advice. Thank you so much. Okay, a question for both of you. How did working from home affect your work? Should I go to Ala first?
I actually loved it. I loved working from home. You know, when COVID hit, I was stuck in Paris, a very, very, very small apartment, because apartments in Paris are horrible. So it was a little bit difficult just to kind of create a routine. However, the nature, I think it really depends on the nature of your work. And for me, yes, we do meet up with, you know, representatives of governments and then also partners and what have you. But there's a lot of our work that's, you know, doing a bit of research or working on documents and what have you. So for me, it was, I actually enjoyed it. And it also allowed me to work from home. So I left France for a bit and I went back home to Saudi Arabia and I stayed there for a bit. So I found it useful. So for the majority, I really did like it. And I think now coming back to the workplace, it's just kind of gave me more of a reason to kind of try to advocate for this hybrid working where, you know, we don't always have to go through the commute and what have you. Yeah, unless, you know, it is necessary to actually meet in person. So for me, it didn't really affect my work. I think it was a good time to just stop and evaluate.
I think, yeah, similarly for me, I enjoyed working from home and working from home today. I like having the balance. It's a balance that you probably otherwise wouldn't have got at this sort of junior end of your career, at least in what I do, if it wasn't for the pandemic. So it sort of was one of the plus points. I guess what really helped my working from home experience was that I had worked at Squires for about 6 months before we went into the first lockdown. So I felt like at least I got to know people. I knew the team that I was in, and it sort of knew how the systems worked, etc. Which I think would have been more challenging from home. And also supervision was really good. So I moved seats like so many times during the for the rest of my training contract, moving to different teams. And the first time I did it from home, it was odd because normally you physically on that morning go and grab all your stuff and move offices, but it was weird doing that in my kitchen. But level of supervision was great, in that we have sort of Microsoft Teams, obviously got email and phone as usual, that everyone was kind of accessible to answer questions, and I didn't feel like I was ever just left with work where I had no clue when I wasn't physically there in person to ask somebody about it. So I think for that reason, my working from home experience was really good. I got a lot of the plus points out of it. Now we've got more of a hybrid setup, and it's great to be back in the office. I think the bit that you miss when you're at home is that as a trainee or a junior, you often listen to people's telephone calls and meetings, so just kind of absorb a lot, which you don't necessarily do at home.
Okay, let us have a look. There's a question from Will, and I know Ala has already kind of touched on this, but it would just be useful to hear both of your perspectives on this. And Will's question is, how useful is a law degree when applying for non-law related jobs?
It's a tough degree, and people, I think, know when you're interviewing afterwards that your academics have to have been good, and you have to be able to write well, argue well, read and understand information, which is required across a lot of jobs and requires a lot of sort of general awareness about the world, because law affects how so many things work, that I would imagine as a sort of general skill set. Great. And I suppose anecdotally, I have friends that don't work it, plenty of friends that don't work in law, that went to Newcastle Uni and did the law degree and have gone into accountancy, tax, HR, variety of jobs, and seem to do really well.
Yeah, I would just add on that, like, it's a very versatile degree to have. Like, it's one of the degrees that I would tell people that are unsure what they want to do with their lives to get into it, because you can do so much. Like, a lot of the, like, when I applied to things, or I was approached, for consulting firms or firms, in relation to like culture in general. And I didn't have the specific kind of archaeology or history or what have you degrees that they wanted. It was just it's just one of those degrees that I really feel like you can do anything with. So if you're if you're interested in foreign affairs in the diplomatic world, or if you're interested in the private sector, sort of consulting or what have you, it's just a good degree to have. So super useful.
And just to kind of echo that, I've been working with law students for about 18 years now, and I've seen them go into such a huge range of things. Yes, there are lots of lawyers, but I can think of actors, people going into journalism, people becoming accountants, people working for the government. It's easier to say what you can't do, really. It's potentially a vehicle to take you in all kinds of different directions. So rest assured of that if you do decide the legal professions are not for you. A question here from Aimee about your work-life balance in your current jobs. Is it good for you both? Is it how you expected it to be? Could you say a bit about that, please?
I think my work-life balance is pretty much how I expected it to be, in that my working hours vary. So I'd say my average day is probably like 8:30, like 8:45 till maybe like 6, 6:30. But equally, sometimes I'll finish earlier, but then sometimes I'll work considerably later. And that's kind of what I expected it to be. I think I work in quite a large commercial firm. Some of our colleagues work internationally in different time zones. And then I do a fair bit of corporate work, which tends to be quite high pressure work. So I find it enjoyable. I'm okay with the fact that I won't get all of my evenings and weekends free. But I think it's definitely another factor that you would want to consider when you're looking at what type of career you want to go into, and also what type of firm you want to work at, because it's not for everybody. but in general, my days are pretty standard.
So I don't have a work-life balance. It's horrible on my end. And I think, there's a lot of things that play factor to this. So it's very difficult. I feel like also in our line of work, although we're more a developmental organization, not humanitarian, but it is really difficult. We are a bit overwhelmed. I think the UN is in general. So work-life balance isn't, I'm still working on it. This is my goal for, this next year, to work on this balance. And I think it really, like, as you mentioned, it really depends on what you're looking for. So some people can dedicate a lot of time just for work, and that's fine. For me, I'm a kind of person, as I mentioned before, I enroll myself in too many courses because I always want to have something on the side. So it makes my life a bit difficult when I don't have that balance where I can just shut off from work and leave. And I think it's really important to understand, like, the nature or the work environment that you're going to go into. This might be a little bit early for you right now, but it also will help you with planning. And you need to be able to kind of have these boundaries if you want to create that balance. So, and it's not easy. So, yes, I'm working on it.
Thank you. And just leading on from that, I guess, quite naturally, there's a question here from Melissa, who's saying, what is mental health support like in your career? Is there anything either of you would like to say about that?
There's mental health support at my work. I think they're very aware that it's quite a demanding career, and time-wise can be, some people have some quite long days. And if you're doing that on a sort of regular basis, that can sort of take its toll on your mental health. And I think there's also an awareness of, like, an increased awareness of the importance of things like mental health, I think, now. So we do have mental health first aiders at work that you can arrange confidential chats with. We also have access to free, like, professional counselling. And I think in general, they're sort of like a couple of the formal mechanisms that I can remember off the top of my head. But in general, it's sort of like you've got a good group of like your cohort that you probably trained with, that are sort of all the same level. You probably did the LPC with them. So that's quite a good starting point of a lot of concerns might be quite similar. Equally, some of my good friends in Leeds are people that are in the years above or below me, that I can easily sort of chat to. But then importantly, I would feel comfortable speaking to sort of the partner that leads my team, or other sort of more senior associates that supervise me on work if I'm going to struggle to meet a deadline or if I've got a lot on. So I think it's all those sorts of informal things as well that are really helpful, because I think they are aware that, like, in the legal profession in general, I think no matter what sector you go into, or a lot of the professions, there are, like, quite a few issues with mental health. So there is quite a lot of support in my work for that.
It is something, I think, that right now, as you already mentioned, it is something that people are gaining a bit of awareness about, but there has to be a transformation, this work environment, work culture transformation. I think in my line of work, quite a lot of people are burnt out. And it depends on which UN agency you're working with, but I think when you're working quite humanitarian development, and these lines blur between like your personal life and work and this work-life balance, it can get a bit overwhelming. And I know, they are trying, and I think it's up to as well people like us that are working in these institutions or in these agencies to kind of advocate for mental health and speak about it quite openly, because I think it's still a difficult conversation for people. So yes, I think it's still a work in progress, but it is something that, for example, for me, I'm really, really aware of it, and I do speak about it quite openly. So we're not there yet, but we'll hopefully be getting there.
Okay, I'm just doing a quick final look through the chat. Okay, two more questions, I think, for both of you. One here from Diana, and Diana's question is, if you could give yourself one piece of advice before starting your law degree, what would it be?
I don't know if I necessarily have a sort of practical tip, because I feel like we've covered a lot of it, and I think I was nervous going into my degree, thinking that the job situation would be quite difficult. I was conscious that like uni fees were quite high, and you know there was sort of I felt like a bit of pressure to do well, and that I'd get something at the end, like I'd get the result I wanted at the end of it, whatever sort of that turned out to be. So I think, other than all that came to my mind, which is a bit cheesy and maybe not helpful, is like, don't worry as much. Like, definitely get organized, definitely get prepared. Obviously take like your exams and essays and stuff seriously at university, but also, like, I think maybe easier said than done, but now looking back, now that I work, just take time to stop and enjoy it a bit more. It all goes so quickly, and I had an amazing time during my degree, but I think just the sort of flexibility you have with your schedule, that you don't have to specifically be in every day of the week, and you've got a bit more spare time at times. I think I maybe took that for granted, and I'd say do everything you can to get prepared, but equally take time to just sit back and enjoy it.
Great advice, thank you. And what about you, Ella?
I would just say law school is tough. And after your first year, you realize one of the things that you will see is that there are a lot of people that were with you that are no longer there. And it's not an easy degree. It's a very interesting degree, but it's not easy. And I think for me, if I were to advise myself, would be move out of the mentality that you can crash course everything in law. No, it's very intensive. You need to know quite a lot. You can recite everything that's in the 5 different books that you've read, but you still wouldn't get great grades, because it is a degree where you need to read quite a lot and what have you. So I think, yes, enjoy it, and yes, do things outside of your degree, but do approach all of your studying as a gradual kind of process, because it's a lot. And yeah, so that would be my piece of advice.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much to both of you for such interesting insights into your kind of journey from your degrees to what you're doing now, and to kind of sharing your thoughts so kind of openly and honestly. To everybody in the audience, I hope you're having a fantastic, I think it's a week that you're engaged with. So all the best with it. And I hope that I will see some of you in the law school in the autumn. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and take care.